All right, you guys ready?
Hi.
Hi. Everyone wants to say hi.
Hi. Hey,
All right, let's go ahead and go over what the issues were for this particular DBQ. So, as a whole, I would say that you guys have the structure down. Okay, you know how to write a DBQ for the most part. You get the contextualization, thesis, how to construct a body paragraph, and all that. So I'm not so concerned with that. What I'm concerned at this point in time is you guys getting the points to pass the AP test. So I have what I call the easy 3 and the down and dirty 4. So you really want to focus on the easiest, in my opinion, the easiest 3 points that you can get. So the easy 3, I put it on the handout. You've got contextualization, your thesis statement, and then explaining the documents. Those are like really, really freaking easy to get. And there's no reason why you can't get those. What do you need on a DBQ to be successful in the AP test? A 3. So I hate telling you guys this, but we're at the point for some of you where you're just like, how can I do this? So focus on those 3 things. And then if you've got those 3 things down, then I'd say the next easiest thing to make it the down and dirty 4 is going to be outside information. Okay? That one's easy because it's just pulling something out, describing it, how does it prove your point, whatever. It's easy. Maybe it's not so easy to think of something, but you only need 1. That's it, just 1. And if you can't think of something outside of the documents, that's just bad. So let's go back to the easy 3, and let's focus on contextualization, because this is an area that it kind of shocked me that you guys did so horrendous on the contextualization. I just say it how it is, obviously. What was the issue, the biggest issue? So a lot of you guys, you can see that first point right there is contextualization is not a timeline of events that happen within the given time frame. You can't do a timeline. You can't say, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And just because all the events happen within the given time period, expect that to be contextualization. That's not contextualization, it's a timeline of events. Okay, so what makes it contextualization is what I have in bold. It has to be about the topic of the prompt. So if you have your essay out, if not, that's fine too. But if you look at the rubric, contextualization, the definition on the rubric says, describes a broader historical context relevant to the prompt. So relevant to the prompt. What's this prompt, guys?
Democracy between Jefferson.
Yeah. So comparing Jefferson and Jackson's vision of democracy. So your contextualization basically should be really around what topic? Democracy. Yeah. So what could you have included? I added some stuff here. So definition of what democracy is as part of the American identity, how the concept of democracy became important to American colonists. Democracy is part of the American experience within the Constitution. The U.S. is a federal republic, representative democracy. That all is what you guys should have been talking about, okay? And remember, it's only 3 to 4 sentences. So you're not writing like, some big diatribe on everything that possibly could have happened, and then you're hoping that the readers are going to pick out a few things that, oh yeah, that fits. You're not going to get the points for it, okay? What is not contextualization? This happened, then this happened, then this happened. Another thing that I saw as well was, say you write 3 to 4 sentences comparing and contrasting Jefferson and Jackson. Why is that not contextualization? That's what the prompt is asking, right? So that's part of your thesis. So some of you guys wrote a beautiful extended thesis where you started talking about the differences between Jefferson and Jackson, and then you go into your argument. That's just part of an extended thesis when you're doing the comparing and contrasting, because it's directly related to what the prompt is actually asking you to do. Okay, it's not setting context. It's basically, this is what you're going to put in your essay, which is different. The stuff you have for contextualization, you may refer back to, but it's not going to be like the main thing you talk about in your essay, most likely. You'll keep referring back to it, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to be like the main argument. And then also, guys, you have limited time to write these essays. I could really care less that Jefferson was the 3rd president and Jackson was the 7th president. I read that like numerous times, and I was like, you're really wasting your time when you're writing that kind of stuff that is completely irrelevant to anything. Okay? So keep the what's called the minutia. Have you ever heard of that term before? The minutia. Keep the minutia out. Keep the bull out. Okay? Don't try to sound impressive. Ooh, I know the Third Amendment, or not Third Amendment, I know the 3rd president of the United States is Thomas Jefferson. They're going to be so impressed. No, they're going to be like, why are you writing this? This is stupid. All right? Who cares? So, sorry if you're one of those people. I'm not trying to be mean, but I want you to get this point. So, in the packet, if you can open that up to the 3rd page, 4th page, whatever it is, where it says contextualization. I copied 2 examples of contextualization that are good examples, and they're not necessarily, the best thing I've ever read in my life, but it gets the point. And what do we want on Friday? Points. Okay? Let's just be, you want a 5, you want points. Let's be honest, right? Right? So let me say this. So we're talking about now the easy 3, but if you can get the down and dirty 4, if you get a 4 on the DBQ, you could be on the way to getting a 5 on the AP test. Okay? Gold. Yes, you're gold. All right? So let's look at the examples of good contextualization, just so you guys can see an example of what I'm talking about. Okay? So Donovan wrote this. He wrote, before Thomas Jefferson was elected president, America was still in its infancy, trying to develop a national identity and repeatable precedents for future generations. All these precedents would be held to the law of the Constitution. It was the role of the early presidents to determine interpretation for the ambiguity of the Constitution. The concept of democracy was centuries old, but to avoid tyranny of the majority, checks and balances needed to be put in place. Virtually all Americans agreed this was necessary, but the extent varied, specifically regarding the powers of the executive. Since the main provision of democracy is majority rule, many presidents sought to reflect the majority who elected them, even I think it's even if it somewhat disregarded the minority. So Evan said, good job, Donovan, if you can't hear that. It defines what democracy is in the United States, and it really sets it in context. Hey, this is what the essay is going to be. It's going to be like kind of about this. This really sets the stage for what he's going to be talking about. Okay, by you like listing a bunch of things that happen, it doesn't set the stage for what you're talking about. Okay, and then James is right here. Give him a. No, I'm the only person clapping here. There we go. This is a really good example of just down and dirty and to the point. And I like this one because this is exactly what you need to do. It's not fancy, but it's exactly what you need to do. The Revolutionary War for Independence has ended, and the American people were beginning to establish themselves as a new nation. This new nation was going to be built on the ideas of freedom, independence, and self-government. He's defining democracy here. It's what it's about. One of the most important ideas was the idea of representative government, where the power is in the hands of the people who would elect leaders to run the country. The basis of democracy manifested itself into what is now known as the United States. That's just down and dirty. That's just like simple. It's good. Okay? So those are a couple examples of contextualization. If you still don't get it, you can come and ask me at some other point in time. Or do you have any questions right now about contextualization? Is anyone here who didn't get the point, do you not understand why you didn't get the point? You watching this at home, do you understand why you did not get the point? All right. Okay. Follow me on Twitter. My handle is @LGLeeming. Okay. The next one for the easy 3, and you guys have been doing pretty good for the most part with your thesis. The only thing that you need to make sure that you do is answer the prompt. Remember, AP stands for answer the prompt. Okay, that's what you do in the AP class, is you answer the prompt. So for this one, for those of you who had issues with the prompt, essentially your problem was that you did not really address What do you think? What was not addressed? Huh? Democracy. Because this really should be about, if you look at the thing here, compare Jefferson and Jackson's vision of democracy. So your thesis statement should address their visions of democracy. And let me ask you this. Don't you think at some point in time in your essay you probably should define what their visions of democracy actually are? For those of you in video land out there, they're all shaking their heads yes. They're saying, yes, Mrs. Leeming, you're right. Okay, yeah, your thesis should address something about democracy, but also remember, not only are you being tested on content, you're also being tested on what? Your historical thinking skills, or this year they call them historical reasoning skills. So what was the thinking skill or reasoning skill for this one? Compare and contrast. So you also needed to address that. There should have been some type of something about the vision. Guys, thank you. If you're going to come in late, just sit down. Thank you. It's okay. So if you are going to write this essay talking about the visions of democracy, your thesis needs to address that, obviously. That's the content part of it, but it also has to address the similarities between and differences perhaps between Jefferson and Jackson. So it has to address both of those. Okay, so every essay will have a general topic and historical reasoning skill, that's HRS. You have to address both of those in your thesis. So for this one, you had to address both their visions of democracy and the idea or the skill of compare. There were some essays, enough of them where I needed to write it down. The essay was not about the similarities and differences between both administrations in general. Okay, so it wasn't about just them overall or what happened overall. It was about their visions of democracy, right? Count how many times that you actually have that in your essay.
A lot. I don't understand what it says. It says you have to be, and then, I don't know.
You can ask me later. Okay. If you have a specific question regarding your specific essay, let's do that later so we can get through this video. So it's not like overly long. Okay. Make sure your thesis is specific and clear. If I can't figure out what your argument is, that's a huge problem because this is an argumentative essay. So an argumentative essay is all premise that you have an argument and that you are providing evidence to prove your argument. So if you don't have an argument or it's not clear or you answer the prompt wrong or you don't answer the prompt, whatever, then it's going to be very hard for you to get any points really. You need to make sure that your thesis is strong, okay? And then make sure you include all the points you'll be bringing up in your body paragraphs. So you're not just going to say that, for instance, Jefferson and Jackson's vision of democracy were similar yet different. That's weak. Okay, you're not telling the reader what your areas of focus are going to be. You always have to have the areas of focus, be it 2 or 3. Don't go beyond that. Don't do 1, okay? And then don't do 4. It's just too much. Focus on either 2 points, so a 4-paragraph essay or a 5-paragraph essay, one or the other. And then some of you guys, for whatever reason, I don't know, maybe you thought this was complex understanding, that you kind of turned the essay into a CCOT essay. So you were talking about that this is what changed from time to time, from this president to this president, or this is what stayed the same from this time. So that wasn't the historical reasoning skill. It was asking you to look at, not causation, comparison. So that's the second easy 3. Got contextualization, thesis, and then, oh my God, this one just drives me nuts. And so many of you guys did so bad with explaining the documents. This is like the easiest thing in the entire essay, explaining the document. Hey, you may misinterpret one, and that's fine, whatever. But when you're not like explaining what they are at all, that's a problem. Okay, so let's look at explain document to make sure you guys can get this point. First of all, please do not cherry pick. So what do I mean by cherry pick?
Take like a single sentence out of the entire document and say that's the purpose.
Right, so taking a single idea, a single sentence out of a document and saying that is the main idea. So the one that was abused the most is going to be document 7. So document 7 was the one that was a secondary source, and then it talked about all kinds of stuff. Said the general's views on office holding became more democratic. He proceeded from the idea that all offices, whether appointed or elected, must ultimately fall under the absolute control of the people, that offices should be rotated, that's a spoils system. He's talking about the electoral college, something about a constitutional amendment or something. I don't know, he keeps going on that there should be presidential terms, direct election of senators. So you can't just use one thing. You can't just say that that General Jackson promoted the idea of direct election of senators, because that's not what the document is about. The document is essentially about him becoming more democratic as he became older and wiser, and then you give examples of that. But you can't just say that Jackson, or that the main idea of 7 is one of these things. You have to collectively use the whole thing, everything. That would be the main idea. So you have to use the entirety of the document to get that point for that. And then for the images, so for the venerate the plow one, like a lot of you guys gave like perspective. Like you said that the perspective of Jefferson or the time period or whatever was that the farmers were the most respected people in society or something like that. And when you say when you say like the perspective, that's not the main idea of the document necessarily. You need to explain, like for images, you want to describe it. So literally describe it, that there's a farmer who is plowing the land on his own farm with, I don't even know what that is behind him. What is that? Some lady, I don't know, Lady Liberty or something that is behind him. So you want to describe like what is going on in the document, and then you analyze it. You say, okay, this is how it fits into my argument, and that the perspective of this is, then that would be the hip part of it. So you really do need to just literally, for an image, describe what is actually going on in that image. I know it sounds kind of strange and kind of weird, but that's just what you need to do. Okay? So there's that. The readers don't need you to write the title of a document. So most of you guys are good with that now, but I still saw that. I still saw quotes. Ugh. Do not quote. Do not quote any document, okay? Don't do that. And it specifically says on the rubric, if you look at the rubric somewhere, for accurately describes the content, at least 3 documents to address the topic of the prompt. Quotes are insufficient to earn this point. So you gotta stay away from the quotes. You need to explain what the document actually is. Alright, again, I don't need the title. I don't care who wrote the document. I don't care that for that secondary source. I could care less who Robert V. Remini is. Who cares? It's not important. If it was important to my argument, then yeah, I might do that. It might be for perspective, right? For POV, for hip. Who cares who this guy is, though? It doesn't really matter. All right. There was a big issue with document 4. A lot of people misinterpreted document 4, so I just wanted to give you what that one was about. And I think this is you guys not spending enough time on the documents, that you read the first couple of sentences, and then you're done. Or maybe not, I don't know. Let's look at this one. Actually, no, because if you read the first couple of sentences, you would have gotten the main idea. So document 4 is from Thomas Jefferson. The main idea for this one was that, it says, all two will bear in mind the sacred principle that through the will of the majority is in all cases to prevail, that the will to be rightful must be reasonable, that the minority possesses their equal rights, which equal law must protect, and to violate would be oppression. And then he goes on to talk about the idea of freedom of religion, and that we need to make sure as a society that we respect the rights of the minority who may not be Christian or whatever. So that's what he's getting at with that one. It's the idea of minority rights. And what is a democracy? The democracy, and here's another thing. So you should have probably defined what democracy actually is, especially American democracy. And then you want to look at how does that fit into their vision? How does that idea of minority rights fit into Jefferson's vision of what democracy actually is? That's why it's important for you guys to define those basic terms. All right. So the main idea is that rules should be by the majority, but there must be attention to minority rights. Again, how does that fit into Jefferson's vision? You could probably use document 3, which was the Declaration of Independence, where he talks about all men are created equal. Okay. Yep.
So this is like something you can compare to Jackson, where Jefferson cares about the minority, where Jackson's just the common man. I don't care about anyone else.
Perfect. Yep.
Yeah, I get the point for that document.
Yeah, and you can use it in different ways. You can. It's just really how you argue it. Okay, and because you could use a flip side argument for that, which I'm not going to go into. But yes, yeah, you can definitely use that.
The idea that he's saying this but not doing.
Mm-hmm. So that is the third of the easy 3. Okay, so contextualization, thesis statement, and explaining the documents. 3 points. What do you need to do on a DBQ to actually have a chance of passing the AP test? You need to get a 3. All right? If you want to go a step further, then I would say go for the outside information and make it the down and dirty 4. It's really easy, outside information. It's treating it as a document. Okay, and we'll get into using documents in a few minutes here, but the down and dirty 4, outside information, you guys can do this. If you get a 4 on the DBQ, you could get a 5 on the AP test, providing that you do all the other things really well as well. Okay? So outside of evidence, what is it? It has to be something not included in the documents that helps to prove what your argument actually is. So it cannot be information already mentioned in the documents. And then you treat it as in our document. So what do you need to do to a document? Explain it. HIP it, and state how it proves your thesis or argument. For outside information, you may not be able to HIP it, which is fine. But the most important thing on here is how it proves your thesis, because that's the goal of the outside information, is it's more evidence to help prove whatever your argument actually is. So look, let's go in the packet. This was a frequently used piece of outside information, which I'm sure all of you guys shared with each other, because I got sick of reading about the Louisiana Purchase. Yes?
If you put outside information in your thesis, that doesn't count.
No. Yeah, having outside information in your thesis doesn't even really, I don't know, does it make, can you do that? I guess you could, but it wouldn't count as outside information, because it has to help prove your argument.
The concept of double dipping is constantly in the back of my head, which is stopping me from using good information that would work from context, because then I can't use it for outside information.
Exactly. And that's a really good point. He brings up, listen guys, because this is kind of important, the difference between contextualization and outside information, because context, when you're using that for a document, you're trying to set the context for something, it could be outside information, but you can't double dip. So you have to choose whether you want to use it for context with a document, or if you want to use it completely separately as outside information. You can't double dip and get points for both of those things. All right, looking at outside information, Louisiana Purchase. This was from Amita. She did a good job at using outside information, how you're supposed to get the point. All right, so let's look at it. So her argument, this is just word for word, I just cut and pasted it, and I've added the bold stuff to it to show you where everything is. So her argument, even earlier in his life when he wrote the Declaration, he was concerned about the government and its relation to the people it governed over, since the British government had abused its power, which negatively impacted the colonists and was eventually what convinced them to stage a revolution. So obviously it would be a big issue addressed in his vision for what he thought would make the best democratic nation. So that is kind of her context / argument. Then she's going to describe what the Louisiana Purchase was. This was seen again later in Jefferson's presidency during the Louisiana Purchase incident. Napoleon Bonaparte offered to sell Louisiana Territory for the low price of $15 million. This deal would about double the size of the United States and included important port cities, so it was clearly a very good deal. That's just describing it, right? Then she's going to give the perspective of Jackson on this, which is POV, which is hip. But Jefferson was so set on limited government that he hesitated at first on accepting the deal because he valued a strict reading of the Constitution, and it never explicitly stated that he could purchase the territory. And then her analysis, how is she going to use this to actually prove her thesis? Eventually, he was convinced to buy the territory, but the fact that he even hesitated for such a deal showed his dedication to the ideal of limited federal government and how important it was to him for democracy. Overall, Jefferson's vision of democracy was a country united with each other made up of farmers. And with a limited federal government ruling over it. And that addresses what she was talking about up here in her argument. So that's how you do outside information. You can't just say the Louisiana Purchase shows Jefferson's vision of democracy by opening up land to more people. It doesn't mean anything.
I use the same outside info, but in a different way. I use it the way that I talked about it the day before.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that, like, similar to, I use Jackson's, like, response to the Tariff of Our Nations.
Mm-hmm.
Where they're, like,
Yeah.
they're both pro-states' rights,
Right.
but they're willing to do
Right.
what the thing needs to be done.
Yes, and you got the point for that. Yeah, I remember reading that one for sure. Okay, so that's outside information. Do you have any questions on outside information? How to use it? Look at your essay. If you thought you had outside information, which I think some of you think you have it, can you understand why you didn't get the point? I see people shaking their heads, nodding yes. Okay, and if there's a specific question that you have regarding what you think is outside information, just come on up and we'll talk about it. But this is exactly what you need to do. Okay, treat it like a document. What do you have to do for a document? Describe it, hip it, and then how does it prove whatever your argument is, be it your thesis, or just you may have another argument within your paragraph as well. So for those of you that need to leave, that's a down and dirty 4. That's like easy 4 points. What am I neglecting? I'm neglecting support, which is really like the most important thing ever, but you guys are going to get it, and you're not going to get the complex understanding. So forget about it unless you're good at it. I can say that if you don't get any of the support, you're definitely not going to get the complex understanding. So that and HIP. A lot of you guys still have problems with HIP. The next thing that I would say go for would be HIP after the down and dirty 4. Make it the fabulous 5. Yeah, and then I would go to the support for the sexy 6. And then no one's gonna get 7, so whatever.
Wait, I thought if you get 6, then you're like you're almost guaranteed a 7 if you get a 6.
No.
So you can have a really amazing essay with everything, but not have complete understanding.
That is true. Yeah.
How?
Just by checking off the boxes. And not, that's it.
You're like playing the game.
Yes. Yes. But do you really need the 7? You won't even know, by the way, what you get on this. You'll have no idea. I don't think they tell you that information. It's just the overall score. And I don't even get it either, which really bugs me. I care because I want to know where my students are lacking the most. Right.
I mean, who cares?
Right. You just want the 4 or 5, whatever, for the overall. So that's my piece on gaming the system. And I hate doing that, but we're at that point. Game the system. Contextualization, thesis, describe the documents. That's going to get you a 3. Then outside information. There's your 4. Okay? So if you can get a 4 and do well on the other things, you're going to be fine. All right, so then the next thing that I'd like to talk about, if no one's leaving, so I assume that you want to keep going on. That's fine. The support. Let's go ahead and look at the... Oh, wait, we didn't do HIP yet. Let's do HIP. Do I even have any information on that? Answer the prompt. Describe, explain, support.
You put describe and explain, it's the same thing. And then
Oh.
explain,
Oh, I see, right here. Okay. Explains. That's what it is, explains. Okay. So let's look at this one right here then. HIP. So if you want to go for the HIP point, I did give a handout a little, I don't know, maybe a week, 2 weeks ago that was HIP starters. I don't know, I had like a hippo on it or something. Some people tried to use those and it worked out really nice actually. So instead of just saying the purpose, the perspective, the point of view, that there's different things that you can say to make your essay sound more complex. Okay, and to be honest with you, a lot of the readers say they don't like it when you just say that, the purpose is, but they can't mark you off for it. What they can mark you off for is if you just say, for instance, okay, so I gave you an example here. You can't just state the audience is Congress for Jackson's veto message. Who cares? You can't just say that. You have to take it a step further. I don't even know, does it really matter? For the veto message, does the audience even really matter? It might. You might say the common man. Maybe. I don't think it's the best HIP though. You have to figure out what is the best HIP. And that's why, like, you have to think about this, which takes time. So if you're going to leave something out, you want to leave out the things that make you think. Which is horrible. I'm a bad teacher, but that's okay. You want to pick the one that is the best. And you only need to do 3 of these. So you don't have to HIP every document, but I say do all of them for insurance. So, you know, do whatever you want. Another one was, another example, you can't just state the perspective of Jefferson was that he was a farmer. For document 2, where he states yeoman farmers were the ideal citizens. So how is Jefferson being a farmer relevant? When you explain how that is relevant, then you get the point. So you just can't say, oh, he sympathizes with him because he's from a farming background. What does he sympathize with? You have to explain that. So always take things a step further. All right? Okay. That's HIP. And then for the support, really, all you need to do is you need to tie it to your overall argument. So every document should have something to do with a vision of democracy. And don't make it implied. Specifically state it. Because you may think, oh, well, I thought that by me saying this, that it was kind of an implied thing. No. You want to really state it. You know, what exactly, how is this document, how is this evidence actually supporting what your overall argument is? And I have an example of that in a minute. Okay, so explain why, how an agrarian republic is the essence of democracy to Jefferson, not just that it was. So if you're saying that, what document was that? Well, I guess it could be document 2. Which is dealing with his vision, or not his vision, but his idea that farmers were like the chosen people for what a democracy actually is. Well, you got to explain that. You have to explain why. Why did Jefferson actually believe farmers were the essence of what democracy was? How does that fit into his vision? That would be the support part of it. If you just say they did, you know, they are the essence of democracy. Well, why? In your writing, if you constantly ask yourself how or why, that'll get you the support. Why am I writing this? How? How does this? Ask yourself all the time. At the end of you using a document, ask yourself every single time, how does this prove my thesis? How does this prove my argument for this paragraph? So if you're always asking how and why, then it'll help you. You needed to explain why the common man was the essence of democracy to Jackson, not just that it was. Okay, a lot of you said that. You guys got that, but you didn't explain why. What was it about the common man that made it the essence of Jackson's vision of democracy? So you have to explain that. And everything has to go back to an argument or to the historical reasoning skill. So you may, for a particular document, maybe not tie it to your thesis, but you're using as evidence that Jackson and Jefferson were similar in this way, that's still arguing a point. But you have to state it. You can't just say this shows similarity between the two. You have to explain what the similarity is. You got to think about it. And we don't want to think. We just want points, right? No. At this point. Yeah. Okay. This is horrible. I'm teaching you to game the system. But you know what? The most successful people in life game the system. Okay. Let's just forget about the complex understanding point, the unicorn point. Unicorns don't really exist. So neither does this point. Obviously, no one's going to get it. But if you want to try to get it, it's basically you have to show that you have a solid running argument through the entire paper. That idea of vision of democracy has to be from the beginning to the end and everywhere in between. And you have to really show and explain the similarities between the two men. Okay? A lot of you guys, like, it's not a black and white issue. So, like, for Jefferson, for instance, you say that he supported everyone's rights. So it made him sound like this guy was like the greatest thing since sliced bread. You never even brought up about the fact that he did nothing for slaves, nothing for Native American Indians, he did nothing. For the people he said that needed to be protected, the minority, he did nothing. That's seeing the gray, okay? It's not black and white. You have to get that complexity point, you have to be able to do that. Same thing with Jackson. He did believe in the idea of states' rights. Used Doc 6 for that. Doc 6 was... What was Doc 6? I don't know. Oh, that's the Native American Indian one. So he believed that the state should be able to, remove the Indians. The state of Georgia should have been able to do that. That's a states' rights issue. But then you could have talked about the veto and how that showed that he favored a stronger central government. So you could have used those two things together if you wanted to that way. Again, that's complexity. It takes thinking. And Evan doesn't want to think. He wants to take a nap.
So, like, to get the complex understanding, you need to play the game while also having a beautiful essay.
Exactly. Which is really difficult in 60 minutes or a little bit more than 60 minutes. Okay. A couple of other things. Define your terms. I think that was a big thing that you guys missed. What exactly or who exactly was the common man? What did Jefferson mean by, what does that mean, the agrarian republic? Like, how does that really illustrate what his vision of democracy is? You had to define those things, define what democracy is, define what a republic is, that kind of stuff. And by the way, this is just kind of maybe somewhat of a peeve, but an engraving is not a political cartoon. A political cartoon is there's some type of a political message behind it, usually using satire, over-exaggerating things. This was just was it a medallion or something? It wasn't a political cartoon. It doesn't say what it was, but it was definitely not a political cartoon. So just that one. No quotes, no first person. Do not use I, you, we, any of that. Keep that out of, and that's forever. Whenever you're writing an essay for school, never use I, we, you. We're the greatest. I think this. Don't do that. Just leave it out. Okay. Yes. It makes it sound wishy-washy. I think this. No, just state it. This happened.
Because we know that this is what you think. It's not a fact.
Right. So let's look at this last thing I have here, and then we'll take a short break, and then we'll start reviewing, going back to, we'll do sectionalism a little bit more, and then again, I really want to hit the Gilded Age hard. Okay? So how do you use a document to get all 3 document points? What are the 3 document points? Describe the document, explain what it is, the main idea, support your thesis or an argument, and then HIP. So I wrote this quickly, and there's some errors in here, some grammatical errors, I promise, that I didn't do it on purpose. It's just I wrote it quickly, okay? So what is my overall argument? And of course, I would have written more for this. I may have already talked about Jackson and all of that. So this would just be how I use a document within this essay. So my argument for this paragraph, or this section of a paragraph, Thomas Jefferson's vision of democracy included that the will of the majority drove the governance of the nation. However, with minority rights, which was not always strictly followed. Okay, now I'm going to prove that with a document. So I'm going to use document 4 for this. The main idea of document 4. When Jefferson spoke of laws, he insisted that while the natural aristocracy ensures the will of the majority, will of the majority it is established in legislation that it is. Wow, see, I told you there was errors in here. When Jefferson spoke of laws, he insisted that while the natural aristocracy ensures the will of the majority, which is established in legislation, I don't know, that governs the people, whatever. These laws must take into account the interests of the minority, including those of different religious beliefs. That's the main idea of document 4. Okay, now I'm going to give his perspective. Jefferson was always an advocate of religious tolerance and freedom, going back to the colonial Virginia, where he helped to establish the principle of separation of church and state, and later with the inclusion of the First Amendment into the Bill of Rights. His perspective was that religious belief was a personal matter and should not be sponsored by the state. And then how am I going to use this information to prove my argument, which is up here, that his vision of democracy included the will of the majority, but it wasn't always strictly followed? So I'm going to state, while Jefferson outwardly supported minority rights within the framework of religion, he falls well short of protecting the minority rights of African Americans. Privately, Jefferson advocated the rights of African Americans and the evils of slavery. He did nothing during his lifetime to promote the minority rights of African Americans. In respect to Jefferson's vision of democracy, in which power is derived from the people, his conception of the people obviously did not include that of African American slaves, as he did nothing to remedy the situation. This was a sad reality of the time and indicative of society as a whole. And then I'm going to connect this then to comparison, which is the historical reasoning skill. For both Jefferson and Jackson, then, their vision of democracy in terms of where power is derived from is similar and can be summed up by 2 words: white males. That's how you use a document. It's got everything in there. It's got the argument, the main idea, the HIP, the supporting the argument, and connecting it to the historical reasoning skill.
Only takes 30 years of practice.
So, if I were you, what I'd focus on, main idea of the document. Get that main idea. And then if you're going to go for one other thing in here, HIP, probably would be the second thing for that. Okay. The connecting it to your argument shouldn't be that difficult, but it is for you guys for whatever reason. So, but that's what you guys have to do. If you want to get all 3 points, you gotta do it like this. And this took me maybe about 5 minutes to write, okay, which is a long time to spend on one document, right? You have this. I've taken a picture. You have it in there. Yeah, it's in the packet. You can take a picture of it if you want. Yep.
I think that the reason we struggle with support is that we usually have a crappy thesis.
Yes.
It's hard to support.
Thank you.
That you're unsure of.
You will never have a good essay, never, without a good thesis. And he said, I think why we don't get the support is because we have crappy thesis. Yeah, that is absolutely true. So if you're getting that aha moment now, well, you know, it's a little late, but that's okay. Life goes on. We'll survive. Because we're going to do the easy 3 or the down and dirty 4. Okay? So do you have any questions? I'll turn this off now. If you guys have any questions who are listening, make sure you come and see me, and I'll help you out as best I can.